Femke is an investigator. She investigates interrelations between digital tools and creative practices, and develops projects also at the intersection of design, feminism, and free software. She is a core member of Constant, an association for art and media based in Brussels. And Constant sounds like the Dutch name Constant, or like the English constant. Which one is the?
Either, but it's not.
Okay, it's another thing. Maybe you explain us in a second. She co-initiated the design research team Open Source Publishing, OSP, and coordinated the Libre Graphic Research Unit. And she teaches also the Pittsburgh Institute, Media Design and Communication, Rotterdam, and also in this APAS and ERG. Is it correct the way you pronounce it in Brussels? It's A.Pas and ERG. It's like
Advanced Performance and Scenography Studies.
Okay, yeah, thank you. But yeah, if you could maybe tell us what Constant is and how to pronounce the name before you start, it would be great.
Yeah, it can go many ways because it's constant or with more Dutch or French inflection. Yes, I will start showing some slides of work that Constant has been doing in relation to what we've been discussing in the last few days. It was not easy to prepare this. As usual, I'm a bit nervous, but it will go away. And when I woke up this morning trying to think about why I was nervous this time, I thought it is really about trying not to miss the opportunity to discuss some of the things that have been really close to our heart. And I think this is one of the best companies to do it in. So thank you for being here, and thank you for giving us the opportunity. As you see, I will try not to throw anything away. You see, you have Goda to help me. So Constant is an association. We're an association for art and media. We exist since '97, and I say we. I joined Constant in 2003, more or less. At that time, so '97, I was working with the Geuzen, and another collective in Amsterdam, and this collective was called a Foundation for Multivisual Research. And what is interesting to think about is that at the same time that Constant was starting, the Geuzen was reading Octavia Butler, Donna Haraway, starting to discover works by Starhawk or Isabel Stengers, and so now I've joined this organization, and somehow this all intermixes. Constant, as you read from the bio, works somewhere on the intersection between free software, feminism, and copyleft activism. We're interested from feminism in rethinking the author, which is it's all kind of old themes, but that seem to somehow regain intensity in this posthuman condition, it seems. Free software, because we over the years became more and more interested in thinking about the tools of artists, and as they increasingly became digital tools, we were trying to think of a type of technology that we could inspect, that we could work, try out, copy, distribute, change. And this is what the continuous interest in free software for us is. This combination between the invitation to use, to reflect, and to remake. I think that is really what keeps us interested in this proposal. There's a lot to say and a lot to critique about the culture that has grown around it, but we keep on saying that the Free Software Manifesto is a feminist manifesto, and that's a way to kind of talk back to it. I'm trained, this is I think important to know, not as an artist but as a graphic designer in the heydays of Dutch design in Rotterdam. So I come with that through the web to looking at software. So and for today specifically algorithms. So I prepared two parts. One, again, like a few projects, just to show you a bit what Constant is doing what other projects are around. We could talk about some of them if you're really curious. And then I've prepared something which is a sort of mini experiment that happened in January in the context of a work session we organized where a group of people, and some of them are here, so that's good, tried to develop a proposal, a contribution to a pattern recognition library. I can tell you already, I can spoil the tension. We failed. But I think to talk you through how we tried, and also to somehow make real how far we could think it, might maybe make for a good discussion about the sort of concepts that we've been seeing yesterday, and how we could actually start to develop practice around it. So, that was introduction. So what I'm showing you here is one of the many images that came out of a research project called the Scandinavian Institute for Computational Vandalism. It's actually a project around digital scans of the photography of Asger Jorn, but in a way expands to other archives of mainly Nordic male artists. And Michael Murtaugh and Nicolas Malevey have been going on this adventure of trying to see if they could use mainly algorithms for, let's say, a pattern and edge detection to look at this archive in a different way. So they call it to scan and skim the archive. So here we see photography of Asger Jorn treated with edge detection algorithms. Maybe we can just, because I will.
Did you say it was the Scandinavian Institute
for Computational Vandalism?
Comparative or computational?
So this is the play. It's they switched comparative by computation.
Yeah, sorry, earlier was called comparative, something like that, right? Okay.
I prepared all like a sort of document with all the references and stuff I'm talking about, so I'll give that to you, and then you can look it up. So this is the U algorithm that's made to detect horizontal patterns. It's a patented algorithm. So we debated when we wanted to use this image to promote this event in BAC, whether we were actually allowed to use it, because then the question is, of course, is the output of the algorithm part of that? This I don't know. It's again a pattern detection on a like a contact sheet. So it's this trying to think differently about archives of images, and this work is done in the context of a very long interest of Constant in what we call active archive practices. So practices of archiving that allow people to take, retake, study, and give back. This one is also nice and wild. Another group of work is called Algorithmic, is a group of writers and poets that have started a few years ago to gather 2-3 times a year and to see how they could understand very basic algorithmic processes, and to see how that could influence their work, or how they could use that to write differently. So this is the performance of and so performing is part of a way to do that, because often for us to come straight through the mathematics is hard, but the actual, let's say, the involvement of a group of bodies helps to somehow open that up. So this is the Levenshtein distance. So this is an algorithm to compute the difference between two strings. This is working with students at ERG, the school I'm also teaching in, working through the quicksort algorithm. There was another one. We will probably meet later. Also working with Markov chains to actually generate generate text rather than analyze them. So I've brought some works that relate to this. We see The Death of the Authors is a book that we generated on the basis of literature that's in the public domain, and we used text analysis algorithms to recreate new novels out of a collection of novels, telling the demise of the author in 4 seasons. This is also in a series of public domain works because we are interested in works that are not under a copyright regime anymore, so or on a different type of copyright regime. When authors are dead for 70 years, their works become available in the public domain. And so every year we join the global planetary celebration of Public Domain Day with the creation of a new work. So last year's work was the Bot Opera. Gijs worked on this. Using the work of Fats Waller, Rachmaninov, Beatrix Potter, and who else, Gijs? Wait. Beatrix Potter. Nikola Tesla, exactly. So, as a sample of all the work that became available, creating a conversational program that would combine all these different sources. Oh, this is the Markov chain. Okay. So we created an installation in the vitrine of our office where people could interact with this chatbot, and it would generate then these intricate patterns printed by Roland, our old-style inkjet plotter. So it's like a big monster. This is work of quite a different type, but you will start to understand how it relates. This is a screenshot from Make Human. It's literally called Make Human. It's a open source project that is a middleware between, let's say, projects such as Blender, 3D humanoid animation, and it's used to prepare humanoid figures to then be animated or let's say textures in other programs. If you look at the sliders on the left, you can understand why we started to get interested in what was going on. It has, at first, interesting, let's say, a non-binary slider for gender. But the gender slider is at exactly the same level as age, muscle, weight, height, proportions, African, Asian, and Caucasian. So we started to study this project to see how these decisions were made. We started to interview people. We were working with performers to try and understand what is going on. And this project is what we call the Make Human Bug Report. It's, I think, a 2-3 year investigation in different ways, trying to talk back to the software and see what is going on. So this is one of the animations we made, where we switched the male skeleton for a female skeleton with a so-called in-between body, and then things happen.
You have more example? No, you don't have more example of that.
Of what happens?
The humanoid experiments you did, yeah.
There's more experiment. We can talk about this later. This is an image from this book. I have a few, so if you're interested, you can take one with you. Coming from design, being confronted with the proposal of free software in 2006, and Gijs now is part of the, the current generation of OSP. We started to think about how to do a design practice with these softwares that were actually not used by designers usually. And this has created a fantastic adventure that is still alive and kicking, thinking through the relation between design practice and its tools. As part of that, we've been working on something that we've started to call ballistic design, thinking about design that is not about placement, but is about some form of generation that includes algorithms for placement and optimization. And one of the oldest examples of this is the work by Donald Knuth on the TEC program, LaTeX, which is used still mainly in scientific environments, and we try to appropriate that for, let's say, design art publication. The last project I brought up yesterday, it's a bit cut off. On the top it says, it has the title of the video, From Industrial Heartland to the Internet Age. It's an image that's used by the Mundaneum. It's the current version of the archive of Paul Otlet, a universalist and documentalist working in Brussels in the 19th and early 20th century. He was busy developing a kind of semantic version of the Dewey Decimal System, and in the same time reinventing a world institutions connecting all knowledge of the world, etc., etc. This archive has been largely forgotten until I would say 2012-13. When Google decided to set up its largest data center right next to this archive and adopted this heritage as a kind of way to explain that, Google was invented in Belgium, basically. I mean, so this has slowly started to appear in media, in newspapers, in endless videos and publications. And so we've been tracking that shift, that sort of construction of that story. What you see here is left is the card catalogs of that Otlet filled with millions of cards, and on the right, the stereotypical image of a Google data center. So it works surprisingly well. So what we're trying to do is to respond to a sort of complicated hairball of things, because we have Google arriving in Europe and having trouble with the French-speaking part of that world, and using Belgium as a sort of way in. An ex-mining region that has trouble getting into the 21st century and using Google to construct that story. Local politicians that are, let's say, have personal interest in these connections and are literally patrons of this, the construction of this story, and an institution that is completely underfunded and unable to respond to these questions. So we're trying to intervene without, let's say, this connection between resistance and reflection is, I think, a good description of what we're trying to do. So, yes? So now I switch off this. We can switch on the light again. If we can just switch off the beamer. Okay. I hope I prepared enough. It's a bit schoolish, but that's the way it is here. That's the way I like it. Yeah. You can share and maybe we can make more copies later. I can wear your glasses now. It looks kind of cool. So all these projects could somehow work in the context of what we talked about yesterday, but I decided to do something else, and I hope it works. I wanted to go through a project that we've been trying for a few days, and we'll pick up in August again in the context of Relearn, which is a summer school that has been happening in Brussels with lots of interested and interesting people, initiated by OSP as a way out of frustration of the way technology was taught in art schools. We wanted to have a space where we could have people coming from different backgrounds with different levels of understanding of, let's say, command line code that wanted to learn together. And this has happened 3 years ago for the first time. We did a super successful version last year, and now we're preparing for the next version mid-August. So until the 1st of July, you can still sign up. So you're welcome. So for this summer school, Manetta and me decided to pick up this project and to prepare it to develop it further. So it's a way to maybe have some help with that preparation. The experiment happened in the context of query relations. This was a session, a work session we called it. We organized with Constant, we do that like twice a year. We organized a larger session with, let's say, 40 to 60 people, partially invited, partially because they respond to an open call, where we try to work on an issue that we think is urgent. In this case, it happened in parallel to CPDP, the Computer Privacy and Data Protection, thank you. Let's say, fair, I should say, that happens every year in Brussels, where all stakeholders, and that's the word they use, involved in security, management, technology, policy, activism, it's really broad, come together. So we always try to take students there, because then they get the goodie bag, and it's just like, it's ridiculous to see all the things that then end up in the same, in the same plastic bag. You have pens from Google, from the Pentagon, but also from Bits of Freedom, and it's, everything is like together. So, in parallel to that, we organized these correlations, which we described as poetry to the statistician, science to the dissident, and detox to the data addict. So you understand what we try to do. So we had statisticians, we had people that were in data mining, we had artists, we had anti-data mining artists. And we worked for 2 weeks. 1 week we tried to track, because in Belgium, I don't know if you followed that, but there's been some history with potatoes. We tried to track the data around potatoes and how to think about that. If you really want to know, maybe later you can ask Gijs more. The second week was organized around a workshop in a software package developed at the University of Antwerp called Pattern. So someone from the university came to teach us how to use it and was inviting us to make projects with it. So that's the sort of...
There was any relation between potatoes and Pattern?
Well, I mean,
we are curious now to know how you involve potatoes, in which way? I mean, production of potatoes, consumption of potatoes, the role of potatoes in the...
Everything.
No,
we tried... So it was different ways of trying to think about correlations. And so the first week, by putting the potato in the middle, we could think about, let's say, food databases, transport regulations and how that is computed, but also nutrition, growing them, farming, urban farming, all these kind of things could come in. So we were interested in something that would really...
But you were looking for like new correlation, or just mapping old ones? This would be the question.
All, I think, because it's a way also to understand then how all these different types of data circulate around the humble potato. So that's the second. So this first week I didn't participate in. I have gone through all the traces, etc. So I can't, like, from experience, talk to you about it. The second week was Pattern, and so proposed by the Computational Linguistics and Psycholinguistics research group at the University of Antwerp. So what's interesting, if you look at the first page, the way they describe themselves, which has various layers that came out in the way we started to work with it. So, first of all, the package is open source, so it was important for us because we wanted to be able to inspect, try these algorithms ourselves. So they describe themselves as a research center associated with the linguistics department of the Faculty of Arts. So it's interesting, they kept on saying we're mainly interested in linguistics, not so much in computation. And it's the result of a fusion. So there already starts to some clouds of two other centers that I don't know what that means, the CNTS and CPL. Most of the CLIPS research is based on, a term I never had seen, competitively acquired research funding. So this is, tells you a bit about the kind of, let's say, approach they had. Funding agencies include the Research Foundation Flanders, the Institute for the Promotion of Innovation by Science and Technology, the Dutch Language Union, which is also important in Belgium context, the European Commission, and occasionally companies. And then the goal of CLIPS, so this research center, is to produce internationally recognized top research and resources in developmental psycholinguistics, corpus linguistics, and computational linguistics, and to investigate the interdisciplinary combinations of these disciplines. So this was what was presented to us. So the first, let's say, object on the table is the graph that's on page 2. So that was used to explain us, let's say, the relevance and power of this type of technology. And as you can imagine, this graph made me really mad. Because it's data mining of a social network sites, more precisely Facebook posts, and it shows the difference in language used by males and females. And basically, the conclusion is that, so in the middle, the blobs in the middle is a word frequency, and then around you have a repetition of the same words, but then grouped over subjects. So for women, we have shopping, my hair, excited, love you, I miss, mommy, yummy, boyfriend, etc. And for males, we have fucking, youtube.com, shit, fight, battle, victory, football, etc. So, quite an offensive. It was, of course, introduced with, I will now show you a very problematic graph, but it was shown to so that we could see how well this technology operated, and that was not a good start. So we started to look at where this graph came from and how it was phrased in this research, just to find a way to where do you begin? Because if it's the data that speaks, what can we say? And so we found out that this is part of what is called an open vocabulary technique, where the data itself drives a comprehensive exploration of language that distinguishes people, finding connections that are not captured with traditional closed vocabulary word category analysis. So it's really set up as against, let's say, normative types of research where you have your categories set in beforehand. This is the discovery of categories, but we were presented, of course. So as a way to say what the value of this research is, and again, like the sources are there, so I invite you to look at the way this is phrased. So they say a few things. Our analysis shed new light on psychosocial processes yielding results that are face valid, so somehow commonsensical. They use the example, subjects in high elevations talk about mountains. They tie in with other research, so they confirm research that's done elsewhere. For example, neurotic people disproportionately use the phrase sick and the word depressed. They suggest new hypotheses. For example, an active life implies emotional stability. And also, they give detailed insights. For example, males, so this is the graph we were talking, I was showing, use the possessive my when mentioning their wife or girlfriend more often than females use my with husband or boyfriend. Exactly. So, I mean, you can, yeah. We can go through, I mean, in their open vocabulary ethics statement, just to make it a bit more, even more, they say, our approach, termed DLA, serves as main, I don't know what this is open vocabulary. The words and clusters of words are analyzed and determined by the data itself. So, as we have been working in conversation with technology for many years, this is a hard one to understand how we could make that conversation more interesting. So,
can you say, this is like the idea of the emerging properties of a data set. No, it's like the vocabulary is not set, but it's like you see what the more recurrent terms and things like
that. So, as I said, we organized this work session in connection to this security fair, and as part of it, we are always trying to insert an event into that fair. And this time, we decided to do a debate on discrimination and big data. It's a bit bluntly stated, but we thought it was important to be blunt. So we invited Jeffrey Bowker, Solon Barocas, Antoinette Rouvroy, and Seda Gerses to discuss. And there's a recording of this conversation that is interesting to watch, I think. And so in this discussion that happened in the middle of this week, just before we actually started to engage with the actual libraries, we asked, like, so what do you do when you have a graph like this? Who do you call? Who's the manager? You know, where do you discuss? Because, you know, if it's the data that speaks, how can we speak with the data? And so Antoinette Rouvroy, and I'm not sure if I agree with what she says, but she answers. And she answered, I completely agree that algorithmic normativity, despite the fact that it appears completely a normative, in fact, is a reflection of social or unreflected upon social normativities. An increase, an encouragement of such normativities, but also a naturalization of these normativities, which become invisible, unspeakable, because they have been translated into ones and zeros. So that was her answer to how to think about this graph. Okay. So, pattern. So, with this graph as a sort of introduction, we started to look at the actual technology that was proposed. And pattern is they call it a web mining module. So I'm on page 3 now. It's specifically made to mine social media, Google results, Wikipedia articles, etc., etc. So things that are readily available. It's written in Python because that's a programming language that is relatively accessible. Even I can write some lines of Python. So it combines a sort of accessible framework with natural language processing algorithms, WordNet, some rudimentary machine learning, network analysis, and all kinds of things. So it's a kind of, I explained it yesterday as the HEMA of pattern recognition. You know, it's like it's the basics, but it's relatively well documented. And if you're interested, have a look at the demos, because they demonstrate very clearly what is possible and what not. So you can really sort of try to get a sense of what it does. Common applications as they see it, and so that applications is also needs to be seen in their funding framework, I think, because that was very clearly through the presentation that this work is done in conversation with funders very much. So sentiment mining, age prediction, gender prediction, so you get that, personality prediction, level of education prediction, deception detection, authorship attribution. So all these elements are used in conversation with each other to actually make these applications possible. And what is quite special with Pattern is that you have the full set of all these elements, so you can start to interconnect them. So this was mildly interesting. We were kind of fascinated by the way this was, of course, proposed. And then our workshop giver presented us with the Amica project, which is one of, and you can understand how it's a connection between all these different applications, is a project that aims to mine relevant social media, such as blogs, chat rooms, and social networking sites, to collect, analyze, and integrate large amounts of information using text and image analysis. The ultimate goal is to trace harmful content, contact, or conduct in an automatic way. So we get the full, let's say, moral. So with the graph and then the application of mining social media for finding pedophiles, that's how they get their funding done. Because of course there's concern, and so European Union, governments, etc., want to fund this type of research that is based in linguistics, so not in scary computation, working with psycholinguistics, so we have the psychologists on board to actually protect minors from bad conduct by others. So, and they use, which is surprising, all the elements that were available in the Pattern package. So it's done through this package. So it's HEMA, so it's really basic, but it's done to do quite advanced, let's say, social engineering, I would say.
What's the percentage of error or of mistake? Because I guess these algorithms are not always super precise. But it would be interesting when they guess the wrong person.
So you can imagine that when he sort of bluntly presented this as an application, you know, graph applications, and then this as a star project, the room sort of exploded, and we tried to, you know, say like, how is this, you know, what do you mean, you know, look for pedophiles? How do you do this? And then of course there's the parents are involved, and you know, there's all kinds of let's say safety mechanisms, but to question the way the technology actually could do this and should do this and how this is done was not discussable. So we decided to not confront it straight, but to try and understand better what this process was, to have at least something in hand to go look at that later. So we haven't gone in detail into this application, but we did work with the Pattern project. So through looking at the documentation, listening to the workshop giver, we start to understand that the different steps involved in pattern recognition, especially framed in this sort of mediocre version. So again, this is sometimes difficult to understand. I mean, there you will see clearly where I'm kind of like, I think this is what's happening, but this is not the kind of rocket science stuff. It's very. It's used all over. You will, if you see the elements that are in this package, you will recognize the same algorithms, the same methodologies, the same tricks, the same libraries pop up in different projects. So, steps for data mining or text mining in this case. So first you need to have machine readable, so this is page 4, data or sources, and you have to have a lot. So that already makes certain sources more ready to be mined than others. So social networking is easier than PDF libraries, for example. Because it's data, but to be able to process it is a lot of work, and you also have a lot of noise, so it's easier to go directly to Twitter or Wikipedia, etc. So, and that produces certain things that can be looked at and will be looked at, and certain patterns that can be detected and will be detected. Then you need a corpus, which is like a pre-selection, and if you look at the pattern package, you'll see it, and these corpuses are there. So they are sort of pre-cleaned, pre-thought of, pre-processed. Let's say this is small data, so it's not like the big mass. It's a sort of pre-processed. Then, and this is what's really surprising because we didn't realize that this was happening. There's something is called the gold standard, which is kind of interesting concept because the gold standard is actually the humans. It's this labeling done by humans that is used as a sort of benchmark to test whether something makes sense, if the algorithms can make the same kind of sense as humans. And the gold standard can be achieved in different ways. It can be a commission to a Mechanical Turk flock of people to label certain data. Often it's done by students, or in the case of the sentiment analysis, which is interesting because it's very well used, this library, it's actually done through using movie, what do you call this? Reviews of IMDb, because you have the review, and then you have a starring of the movie. And if you assume that a 5-star movie has a positive language around it, you can understand that you can detect the pattern for positive. So this becomes the gold standard that is also used in the Amica project. So, I mean, it's quite, yeah. So you can, of course, well, anyway, pattern, so
there is like a moment where you have to tune up the algorithm according to the standards, and then you can start to do
So this is what's called supervised machine learning. So there's also unsupervised machine learning, and then this is where we talk HEMA, is where you have a sort of in between. But also that's interesting because that it's a sort of offer space for reflection, or this is how we decided to treat it. So what would happen if this process of annotation would not be a sort of erased and made invisible process, but a moment of interaction with the algorithm? How could we think that, maybe? Because what was interesting to see is in this supervised machine learning, it's always there in some way, whether through this sort of that annotate, like labeling done for another reason and then repurposed as a golden standard, or directly done as groups of students that do semantic analysis of blah, 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 and then this is used to see if someone is depressed or not. So there's always this disconnect between the stupid human that helps the intelligent algorithm, you see? So that process is hardly visible. This is very interesting because we were looking at, readmes, at documentation, at scientific papers. The paper with the, although this is done a bit differently, but anyway, so it's very hard to find documentation on how this process actually is done, who's paid for it, how much time, when it was done, because I think that's quite important. If it's like 10 years ago, the language for sentiment might have changed, maybe, you see. But this is sort of obscured. So what we decided to do is to propose this was our let's say, what we tried. We thought, okay, what if we try to propose a contribution to this project in which we document and make space for the annotators. We don't treat it as a kind of something that is uninteresting and unimportant. We make it really important. Again, we didn't manage to, because of course the technology didn't want us to make that visible, but that was part of the attempt. So this is why I can tell you the story in so much detail, because while we were doing this, we kept precise, let's say, track of all the steps we did, because we thought once we commit this project, our project, to the GitHub repository of Pattern and the open source platform to add our contribution, we will need to have a README that speaks about the place of annotation. So this is how we started this. And so just to this idea, this sense of the annotation being sort of without, I don't know if I can even dare to use the word, but almost being without thinking is really strong in the way it's being not documented or not spoken about. So we wanted to do the opposite. So we had to decide what we wanted to, what kind of pattern did we want to detect. So we had quite some discussions, nice to see it back, to decide what the issue was, because we were looking for something that would be difficult, that would not work in a way, like something that was not polar. Because in the manuals for annotation that we could find, it's very clear that polarity is of the essence. You need to be able to say, this is positive, this is negative. Doubt is not very productive in this way of labeling. So if you look at the guidelines for the fine-grained analysis of polar expressions, so this is one of these manuals that also comes through this linguistics department, you see annotators are encouraged to annotate any expressions with which they think to be polar, even if they are not entirely sure whether the expressed sentiment is positive or negative. Using the unknown label for polar expressions with unknown or ambiguous polarity enables us to determine the polarity of these expressions with the help of domain experts in a later annotation stage. So the annotator itself is not a domain expert. When you say unknown, the expert will figure out what the decision is. Of course, the polarity labels positive, negative, and other should be used as often as possible. So it's really this drive to be, So after many discussions, like what we could do, we thought that a feature called pattern.paternalism would be really great. And we thought, because also our group of people that we were working with came from different countries. Some from the Netherlands, some from Belgium, some from Romania, some from France. And we realized, looking at definitions of paternalism, that it was completely different. Like the histories of and the definitions that followed were all over the place. So we thought it was interesting that we were trying to annotate or label something that was not polar to begin with. So we set up a situation where we could, first of all, annotate sources that we were interested in, because we were very aware that boredom is an issue, and that this polarity combined with boredom produces very strange effects. I mean, that was our first, let's say, idea about what could ever have produced this graph. So we wanted to annotate stuff that we were interested in. So we basically put together a list of sources that we thought that was interesting. So we completely bypassed the ingestion modules, etc., that Pattern gives you to just slurp in the World Wide Web in one click. Then, we made precise annotations of who the annotators were, because we thought that was something that needed to survive in the documentation somehow. Where these, so this is page 6. Let's say the age of someone labeling, it matters. So if you're 15 and you label something positive, or you're 65, it makes sense if let's say, if you think about positivity and negativity in, let's say, when a Dutch annotator does it, or a Slovak. So there's different things that could be interesting to think about when the annotation comes through. We also kept note of the annotation process itself. So there's a sample of things like, when I reached 50, I went back to the beginning and decided to make some of the earlier annotations more neutral. Some paragraphs cannot be definitive without wider context, therefore I took a more conservative approach, for example. Or, I wasn't that familiar with the term paternalism, which evolved along the process of labeling. Another strategy was applied later in the process to focus more on writing style rather than the content. Although this was not always possible to apply. In the later classifications or labelings, there are comments valued with a capital W for focus on the writing style and a capital C for focus on the content. So even while we were labeling, we were of course reinventing the system. And then we were commenting on the labeling, because we thought it was also important. We decided to work in groups, so not to be on your own in front of the data, but to be together. So we tried to make groups of 3, so that discussions could be had between annotators to see why they were thinking. So the annotations themselves were, let's say, done by a person, but always in discussion with others. And so from these discussions, there's also notes. For 1908, it raises feminist issues. I write 0 not because it's neutral, but as a kind of balance, as I couldn't choose between -1 and 1. There are elements that can be considered emancipatory against paternalism. The text is from 1908, but there are also elements which are paternalist as well. So there's this kind of... so once we had our data labeled, and again, we were dealing with small data because we had 1 day to do this work, and that was enough because I think it was pretty intense. And then we had 1 day to try and produce our module. So we started to run the data through the pattern library, and got, of course, into trouble, and that was to be expected. So what happens is you first, let's say, what they say, tokenize the data. So you reduce it, and the terminology is quite violent, I think. You reduce the text to bags of words. So you split all grammar and punctuation and out to come with, let's say, basically heaps of words. And then you start to try to detect patterns from these bags of words. So it means there's no sense of order or what's in the beginning of a text or in the end. So it's really this kind of trying to look at it as matter completely without order somehow. And from that analysis, so after you sort of clean up the data, because that's what it is, you try to see whether there is something that's specific, a specific pattern that distinguishes one paragraph as being paternalist and another as not. So that's what you try to come at, and that pattern then is used to train the algorithm to find the pattern in data it has never seen before. So this is the stage we were in. So we were trying to establish the pattern for, of course, I mean, you know, anyone that does proper pattern recognition knows that our data set was way too small, that our method of annotation was completely all over the place. So that was all part of the game, of course. So when we ran the first time the software to find the pattern, we found the features proposed that would somehow detect paternalism. And so the features proposed by a pattern were W, G, ineffaçable, sorry, so kind of, HP, magazine, autre, S, R, il, laugh, 48, 100, suitable, and une. So that was, let's say, a mysterious output. And so we realized that somehow our pattern recognition was recognizing the fact that we had, after discussion, decided to only use English sources, just to have one layer of problems less. But in one text, How to Observe Morals and Manners, Ariette Martineau had quoted Blaise Pascal in French. And so that was, of course, tripping up our algorithm because it was an anomaly that it couldn't deal with. So that the features were mainly French words that were just kind of, and this was, of course, the paragraph that we had labeled as paternalist. So we had, I think, an hour discussion, like, what do we do? Do we remove this paragraph or not? So we decided to remove it. We said, okay, well, if we have to go, clean up our data, then let's go for it. So we did. And, well, in some things changed, but not so much. And our algorithm wasn't very performative. So we tried to look at what was going on, because we didn't understand why it was coming up with this. And so we started to print out all the messages of what was happening. So that's the last page. Where we were looking at two things. So first of all, whether the annotators between them were agreeing. And we couldn't find a place where we could insert that somehow in, there was no way to say to the algorithm, this, okay. We didn't agree, which could be an interesting something in when you think about pattern recognition, because that's a sort of sub-pattern of sort of thinking about thinking that could work. And the second thing was that we were looking at, and that's of course it's sort of the reverse of training, we realized, because training is about taking out the disagreements. You try to align the algorithm with human thinking, and then the algorithm can do it on its own. That's the idea. So you feed it, you feed your pattern, you look at the outcome. When the outcome does not align with what you thought that would be paternalist, you correct it, you feed it again, until it's exactly in line with what you thought. And so this is where we sort of stopped, because we decided that actually the fact where it did not align, where human annotators and its conversation partner, the algorithm, were disagreeing, and again, like the results are completely, let's say, fictional, because it wasn't correct. So it's more a proposal more than anything. So where we had the algorithm saying it's neutral and the annotator saying it's paternalist, then they disagreed. And so we start to think about what that means to insert disagreement and dissent in pattern recognition and what that would mean. So that's our first start, our first proposal for speaking back to this graph that tells us that shopping is female and fucking is male. Thank you.
it was, I mean, a great example of also what you, Maria, was asking before. I mean, how can art enter this realm of computation? This is a fantastic example. This is the artist inside the machine, inside all the strings. It would be great, frankly, if you have any maybe example of the text that's been selected as paternalistic or not.
Yeah, I think
just to read, because I'm very curious how it was, how the outcome
Yeah.
and how you.
So if you look at page 8.
Okay,
so
page
just a
8.
second.
Yes. Okay.
So for example, so you see the correlation between the two. So 214 is neutral according to the algorithm and paternalist
Yeah, right.
to the annotators, I should say, actually. Because it's of course, it's the result of the multiple annotations, which was another painful moment that we had to average the annotations of the different.
But according to this, the algorithm always said it's neutral, right?
This is where, of course, we were trying to find out what was going on. There's one case that I think we had like. So this is the conclusion. The annotators and the algorithm discussed 228 cases. They agreed on 111 cases. So this is when they both thought it was neutral. So that's why it's just completely flawed. Disagreed on 117 cases. The algorithm missed paternalism on 86 cases, but invented paternalism in one case. The annotators had an algorithm annotator disagreement rate of 51%. So it means like it's completely not working. But anyway, because basically the algorithm was proposing neutral almost in all cases of not finding paternalism because it couldn't find the pattern because the pattern was false. So.
But anyway,
Which
this project show also the limits of computation, the limits of all the software that we use today also to analyze social network, our books, articles, and so on. It's incredible how precisely there is very often, almost always, this kind of apophonic detection of things that are not there. No, in this case, yeah. But
well,
what's your experience?
What I'm trying to say is like, we did bad practice, yeah. So our data set was small. We were messing up the library for some reason, and it's not correct. The outcome, like it's computationally not correct. Yeah. It's not the algorithm that's wrong. I mean, it's like
no, but also you were pushing the limits of the let's say ontological semiotic construction of this algorithm, because all these algorithms, when they apply to sophisticated notion or political notion of very sensitive issue, they fail most of the time. If they have to detect the face, they can do that today. It's a bit scary because today there is algorithm used on the metro subways to detect the gender according just to the conformation of the face, and that's very useful for advertisement, for instance, to see how many female or male population are looking specific advertisement. But in your case you were pushing the system to a weird limit of computation, so to speak. Is there any question maybe or other things to
a note and a question, because what you said, we were sort of very rough, and especially in the training phase.
Microphone.
So we were especially rough in the training phase of the algorithm, where you put the data and the annotation, and we didn't go very far in there. It was interesting at the conference lately. There was introduced the Stockholm syndrome of technology, and we almost fell into the gap where we wanted to think about why it didn't work and wanted to do research about this. And my question was actually maybe directed to you also, but also maybe Femke, because the complex issue is maybe the issue that's not properly decompiled. If you think about a logic problem or a computational problem. Like maybe if we say it's a complex issue, it's actually a collection of underlying issues which we just need to better research, and in a way that maybe also aligns with the pattern.
Well, for me, it's a double game. This, I think, it shows. Let's say by using the offensive proposal that you can detect a pedophile, yeah, is almost, like say, we try to be constructively offensive to the algorithm as well, in asking it to do to help us to do something that we couldn't, we knew it would not be able to handle. We were making trouble. But it was interesting to see how in the process, of course, we wanted to make it work. So there's this let's say, interplay between, like, you know, the deadline comes near, we wanted to, you know, post this to the pattern project. We were really, you know, this is what we wanted to do. So we started to strip out stuff just because it couldn't deal with it. So you get this I don't know. There's another project where I tried to work on the problem of let's get things done first. That often in sort of in a technological context, you're confronted with solutions for problems. Like, it's very difficult not to fall into solutionism. And so even here, we were actually doing that. So the removal of Pascal, for me, is really an example of where we could have stopped there. We should have stopped there. We didn't, because we wanted to make it work, you know. And then, of course, it didn't work. So that was yeah. But yeah, I don't know how to. It's like wanting to have a conversation with this type of technology. Where do you go? How to I don't know, perform, make it social, not how to make that happen.
I find this a project very interesting because it's like a modern contemporary version of what Foucault did of his research on the archive, on the apparatus that precisely on the norms, on the standard of producing the abnormal. It was, of course, the criminal, also the sexual abuser, the pedophile. In your case, it's like this. Sorry for using this pedophile as the archetype of the abnormal, the criminal, but this is the case. It's like you enter this algorithm, digital apparatus used to identify this profile, and it's like it's like to see Foucault research on the medical archive transported into another age. And for me, it's like how this algorithm, this apparatus, is like this, say, machinic combination of legal definition, legal statuses, no, medical definition, language, so psycholinguistic in a very complex way. No, it's a very complex research what you started. No, I hope you continue to. No, but it's very fascinating. It's like enter into this, machine of normativity nowadays. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm still puzzled by this graph, really. Like this. Because I can't.
Yeah, because obviously psycholinguistic is really, depends, but also is a labeling discipline.
Yeah.
So it's labeling, classifying. Doesn't necessarily mean is to do with meaning or social practices. It's about this classifying. So it's a level of there's two things. So one end is this kind of data-driven, inductive model, because these labels, these words are basically not in a context, and they are just. You said something before, Matteo. Instead of being the categories emerge from. It's an emergent like a model. So the categories, instead of having categories and then having categories to be plunged onto words, you obviously have words out of which you have the category, male, female, I don't know. And so, and this is supposed to kind of have a different give us a different model, which is more open vocabulary. I mean, I don't think it's open vocabulary at all. Because it's still about labels, labeling and classifying. but it's completely taken out of what the annotators were doing, discussing and giving reason why we say this and why we say that. That's something that goes on to another level that is not just classifying. That will be an open vocabulary. And the question is, what is a vocabulary? Psycholinguistic vocabulary is completely attached to this kind of mathematical model of classification, even if it's bottom-up, still is classification. So the problem is the use of this discipline, or this kind of, this discipline that, is psycholinguistic, and what else was there?
Psycholinguistics, and
computational, there's obviously a lot of crossover between the computational model, the syntactic, symbolic organization of words, and instead of being Chomskyan or, cognitive in that sense, that is innate, okay? So you have an emerging model, but still syntactic and based on this kind of associationist model that doesn't really open the vocabulary to not only context, because I don't want to say it's about context, it's about culture, it's about situation, that's also problematic, because that becomes it's about us talking between me and you, and it doesn't have the chance to become more universal, let's say, or more generic. Because
of course we go into, let's say, adding context where it seemed to be stripped out. I mean, that's the sort of first act of I don't know, defense somehow.
Right.
But I'm just trying to think context in these environments. Context that does take the algorithm, the software, the research center, their economic situation. I mean, it's all there. It's all part of the context.
Yeah.
And of course, to have only the discussions between the annotators is a bit of a, let's say, it's a stand-in for something.
But what is the context of the algorithms?
And how can
what is the level of sociality of the algorithms? So the context of the algorithm within the machine, within the history, and it's not just the context. So the use of algorithms of data, how can that be documented as a kind of contextualization of its, instead of and also, obviously, to complexify, you need to possibly use more than one algorithm, and possibly use, as you said, the larger data set, that. But if you want to, obviously, that will take 100 years. That's the problem, that this takes too much, too long. So how do you make an intervention to show that there is a context of the algorithm, and also the way because this is absorbs a social function, but just on a very syntactic level. We know that, obviously, these words that became gendered are completely, if you put them in a context and analyze the vocabulary and the reflection, are completely, ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And then, so you can't take them as norms. They're just labels, they're not norms, because a norm has to do with all a serious level of justification as to, how there's no justification.
But norms can be emergent. I think
that's the scary
condition
part.
that we find now as a difference to.
Yeah, but I would say it's not a norm in my.
Okay, but that's.
You see what I mean? Because it doesn't have this meta label. This is a norm in terms of just a labeling. It's not a norm, because norm involves justification. You see what I mean? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Why is it a norm? It's a label.
Femke, why you were shocked by this polarization of gender in this? Which sense?
Because it's presented to me as nature.
That this is an automatic outcome.
That this is out there. That this has been.
Okay. Because, it's a demonstration of the separation of the gender somehow.
And then when you start to see how this data set now functions as a way to text gender,
Right.
I get really scared. I really think like
Yeah.
I really it's urgent
Yeah.
to intervene. Like,
But you know, I agree. But instead of being, you know, norm could be a much more we should think of it in a much more constructive way. Or this is pure fascistic labeling. I don't know. It's that level of super immediacy. You know, blue is what is white. You know, it's that kind of without think. You know, there's no responsibility, endorsement, or taken by anyone about what they're saying.
but
That's what I'm
this,
saying.
what I'm trying to say is that it seems like already the event of the bag of words, the bag of words, that is sort of standard operation
Bag of
in
words.
any pattern, like
Yeah.
text mining operation,
Yeah.
is doing that. It's just part of it. There's no, I mean,
So you mean it's just a reinforcing apparatus that reinforce previous kind of norms and
I don't know. I'm
forms of
sensing
life
when I
and-
see this, I'm just wondering what is, what to think when.
Well, I mean, one thing it may suggest is, if you look at the kinds of words there's nouns, verbs, and adverbs. So those are, and then there's some kind of, there's emoticons in the female, and then there's, HTTP:// in the male, which is kind of interesting. So there's also this kind of mix of language. It makes me think there's a very small sample of texts there, and it also could simply prove that there are some entities on this who are generating text for this sample who are enacting male and enacting female.
Yeah.
And these are very simple ways of enacting the male, is to talk about Call of Duty, Black Ops, and your Xbox, and so on. This
Doesn't necessarily belong to men, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. So this produces a means of
Yeah.
passing as male or female very easily. So there's a kind of machine that's set up. One way of looking at it would be, okay, what's the difference between a natural language and a formal language? If we take the opposite, if we say, okay, this is a classic problem of natural language having so many multiple variables and so many things that make it unprocessable. And this is what Tarski called natural language evil, because it was uncompilable into purely logical propositions. So if we'd say, okay, how do you make a natural language into something that is absolutely compilable into a single meaning of a thing? In the way that you might design a programming language to compile to one meaning. And you look at some of the languages that attempt to do that are, for instance, military languages. So if you look at NATO's jargon, there's manuals you can find online, there's several hundred pages of acronyms that have singular meanings. And you look at those in action. If you look at the Afghan war diaries that Chelsea Manning released, you get days and days and days of simple 3 and 4 letter acronyms following each other. Then you have problems emerge, like a celebrity comes to visit the troops and it has to be described. Or there's a village that has to be described in relationship to whether it's friendly or non-friendly. Then you have to introduce natural language. So there are programming languages for troop operations, the movements of weapons, the movements of weapon systems, the calling of weapon systems, and so on, that are acronym based. But then when something in excess of the code happens, they have to resort to natural languages. And also because you've got human operators, you have misspellings, people under fire having to type in a series of acronyms to describe what's happening. We'll mistype occasionally. So there's this problem of producing a formal language which can be enacted fast, that's sufficiently descriptive to describe, as universal as possible range of conditions in which the military will encounter, which allows fast communication, singular forms of understanding. So even within English, there's often mistaken interpretation between American troops and UK troops, for instance. So there's a need for a kind of fully formalised military language, which can have very, very radical consequences. So it's interesting to see the way in which, if you took it from the opposite perspective, how would you reduce language? How would you make it singular in terms of meaning? How is that? I mean, how is that possible?
It's back to Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the type of thing like, wow.
Philosophy of language.
No, it's in there. But, yeah, but so military language to talk about paternalism.
Yeah.
Huh?
Target acquisition of paternalism.
That would be interesting. Yes. But yeah.
What I miss a bit is where what are the data sources?
So you can this Facebook.
This could be a game like related community. This could be, I don't know, Twitter. I don't know.
You can look it up. It's Facebook data. It's I think I don't know how many, but it seemed like a lot.
Yeah.
The interesting detail is that they tweaked the tokenizer for this to include emoticons because they would normally be filtered out, seen as trash, and now they decided that it was not. So that's kind of. So no, it's a large research, well published, large data set.
But the only thing that wasn't published is then who did the annotation? Who kind of derived the
This is literally this is annotation in a much, let's say, more sense that it's through the tokenizers. There's a semantic markup done, and this is in libraries as NLTK, like language natural language toolkit that allow you to look at the structure of a text or actually take it apart, tokenize, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
So that's an annotation that's done.
Yeah. Very early stage. Yeah.
Early stage, and so there's no mechanical Turk action here in the production of this series of graphs. It's a series of graphs. Yeah. There's also expressive. What's when someone is holding back or being.
I think Wittgenstein is actually quite a nice approach in the sense that the conversations, let's say, gear towards certain topics. Certainly, if they're prolonged, or so. In a way, I think you're right in saying that to label this or to normatively label this as female or male is kind of takes completely overlooks the fact that this is also something of an ongoing conversation. So I don't know. I've only looked at this graph, so I have no other reference frame. But there's many more mechanisms at play than just the gender analysis there. There's also the logic of the conversation itself, which is completely. I mean, this is clearly about games. So what's related Xbox and Black Ops and all those things are. They're stuff that ties together. So once it's about games, and all the other things become more kind of how do you call that? Statistically probable. So it's not about. That's not about male or female. Even if girls talk about Black Ops, then of course you have to talk about metal and the Xbox and all the other things. So and you can't take that. So yes, that boys talk slightly more about games than girls. That you could derive from this, but not that metal itself, because it ties in another. That separate network is not identified here. But so there's a lot of other, let's say, reference frames which are left out of this. And so you're completely right, I think, in saying that this cannot be just at face value, that's girl, that's boy, and that's it. And we have to use these as norms to read, because there's many other things that happen here as well.
I know. You are worried about the fact that this is gender recognition, like facial recognition, can be used on this basis instead.
It's the features, so it becomes what we were, doing wrongly doing, but these then become the features. To be recognized, and
that's
so
the
this is
thing.
where the pattern recognition and and the prediction and preemption start to feed into each other, and you can see it happen. It is
But is
literally
there,
what is happening.
People teaching algorithms how to instead complexify their pattern recognition?
So
Because, I mean, this is your experiment, but I would imagine that, you know, it's not a chance to do this experiment. This training algorithms to learn there must be research, money put into this kind of military intelligence, financial intelligence, where actually this is happening. You know, that the level of correction is actually faster, and the level of vocabulary is becoming less labeling, descripting, and more at least trying to understand some kind of meta context where the algorithm doesn't get it wrong. It'd be like the drone. The drone is still ignorant or whatever, but it is learning, you know, because the problem, we know that this is a problem, and so I don't think we are just addressing it artistically or, you know, interventionally, but this is governative as well.
Machine learning is the biggest hype now in business right now
massive.
in California. So.
And cuts across, and is ubiquitous. And
these are examples of assisted machine learning. Of course, the big investments are in non-human assisted machine learning, where the computer by itself should.
But what I'm saying is that here the human, the place of the human is not helping.
Yeah.
So it's not, and I'm also, this is not what I'm trying to say. I mean, I'm interested in what that place could be as a inter-algorithm human conversation. So, but not as a safe safety valve. But I think there's something fundamentally strange in the way meaning is emerging through these technologies, and I'm just
But humans, I guess, put the categories afterwards, which was male and which was female. The algorithm just puts the patterns together, because it would be the same on like for example, I don't know if this is true, there was like an urban legend that the British secret agencies, they had all these images from private conversations and videos, like sending images to each other, and then when they went through the archive, it was mainly male genitals. So all the face algorithms that they had, they couldn't work on this. So they had to like teach the machines, okay, this is not a face, because humans didn't want to just see like male genitals the whole day clicking like no. So they made this algorithm that could recognize genitals instead. So it was like a kind of machine learning in a way. But I don't know if this is true. I just like saw a few articles online, but
the main problem with these algorithms that you see in this image as well, which is indeed from. Oh, sorry. The problem is that emerges here in this image, in these of the words, is similar to that of the annotator. That here you have text from social media, which is quite clearly indexed, because a lot of people on their profile say whether they are male or female. So then you get like a similar training set as the corpus of IMDb, for example, that you have a clear number with a text, and that you use that to train to get training data. And I think here something similar arises, that you see the excesses and stereotypes arise because they are the most used words by certain genders, but that's as much as problematic as you see with annotations, that you, when you have multiple annotators on one sentence or one paragraph, when they disagree, you remove that paragraph from your training set. So you only keep the ones that are completely clear, and you don't include the ambiguity of the whole situation. And I think that's similar to what arises here.
No, there is a kind of trick with the amount of data, and so the promise of its precision, and we have the long tail, and we, discovery, all these kind of things, and then at the same time the fact that it, through averaging and let's say only being able to pick up on the things that happen so many times that they become persistent. And that's a kind of there's a kind of mismatch between these two promises somehow. And so anyway, but.
I received a kind of indication that probably we have exhausted the time, so it's time for stomach is calling.
Yeah, you hear the sounds.
No, I'm just your stomach. I hear you. Femke, thanks a lot. It was very interesting and disclosing a lot of things we didn't know about these machines. And and now.
Now we have sandwiches on the first floor, so please join us all. And then afterwards, in an hour, 2 o'clock, I think we're going to gather here for the concluding conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.